good, everybody? Remember 17 here, and now it's been pretty much almost a week since the beta has been out, the closed beta, and it's going to come to a close soon. So, of course, I told y'all I'm going to go give a pros and cons video about my thoughts on the beta, and usually I go with the negative first and then the positive, right? And I usually kind of scale it from like the lighter stuff into the more heavier, serious stuff. So, off rip, first bad thing about the beta, the music. The music was absolutely not it. The music was, I played UFC 3, I played UFC 4, even UFC 4's music was, like you shut that off. UFC 3 had some songs on there that were like, you memorize it and you're like, okay, word. The music that we had, I really hope there's a better soundtrack, because that soundtrack was not it, bro. It was not it. Now, with regards to presentation and what they allowed people to do in the said beta, a lot of the common complaints, which I agree with, is that there wasn't access to a practice mode or tutorial or anything else like that. You kind of went into the fire and had to try to figure it out on your own. And if you weren't really, buddy with like higher level players or people that are actually capable of experimenting and trying new things, you were pretty much like a fish out of water, right? And if you ran into somebody who knew what they were doing, it was definitely not a good time for you with the TBS system. But if you figured out how to do all the fun stuff like the scrambling and everything else that they've mentioned in the deep dive, it was a really, really fun experience. And that part was pretty much cool. But I don't like the fact that they didn't give you guys a proper tutorial before being able to play against the general population. Another thing I wasn't too much of a fan of is that the accuracy had seemed pretty high. I'm pretty solid defensively. I'm up there when it comes to defense, but there was a lot of instances where the accuracy is high. Now, that's something that we know. This is a beta. This is a beta, so it's not the finished product of the game, but it is like important to know, hey, like this is like super, super high tracking. Like the tracking was very high for a lot of moments where shots should not be landing, and that's something that they need to get adjusted. Another thing I'd also like to say for the beta, where they gotta tweak certain things with the block. Now, I've always preferred the UFC 4 change to the block in comparison to the Captain America block that they had in UFC 3. But what I'd like to see is a reduction in the short-term block drain from shots that are not from their proper range, right? So if you're landing like those little snoop boop jabs, those little like tiny crosses and whatnot, if they're not in the proper range, they should not be draining as much as they do, or rather even the bleed through being as high as it is when the short-term block is low. Those strikes, see, if you look at, like I said, I've mentioned this before, like the 4-ounce gloves, they're not big boxing gloves, right? They're not going to protect you from everything. However, we also have to note that little small, if it's not fully extended, if it's not a proper shot at the correct range, it's not going to go through as effectively, right? It shouldn't be able to reap the same benefits as a proper clean shot that gets bled through, right? If it's a perfect 1-2 and it goes through at the right time, then there's no real issue there for me. But it does become an issue if you have somebody throwing, like, say, jab, rear hook, and it's a jab, and the jab is either completely out of range, it can barely land clean, or if it's super close and it forces the hit stun animation to happen. That's where it's a huge issue, and that's where I can see a lot of players, especially if they're just trying to work on the defense and whatnot, they're going to have an issue with that, because just logically speaking, how's that small little shot doing that much to your guard? So I would like to see them go into a direction where these shots are not only are they not doing as much damage to the block on the short-term level, but also they have a reduced sense of impact on the frames, on the guard impact, basically the guard impact on how it works on the bleed through. So that's going to be really important. And that was something like I noted. I'm like, yeah, that's with the way the accuracy is right now, it's too strong in that direction. And in order for the defensive buffs to work accordingly, that's where it needs to be done. I'd also say with regards to the takedown entries on the said beta, especially because of the weight class provided, the takedown entries need to get tuned more for a buff towards more the grapplers, right? Because in UFC 4, there was a lot of nerfs because of how like the mini games worked in UFC 4 and certain access to positions that had extremely strong subs. Now that the game has changed a bit and it's much easier to escape those positions when you play smart, it's time to like kind of be a little bit more lenient with some of the takedown changes, especially because you have the same degree of difficulty trying to do something with a higher level wrestler or grappler than you do with like a lower level grappler that has access to turns, right? It's almost like the window of opportunity does not matter as long as they get the denial. And another issue that I also had is the fact that, input wise, the blocking is still the same, right? That much is, is pretty much a given. There's no talking about a new input for like low blocking or checking. So that unfortunately is not a thing. So when you factor that into the equation, right? If you're not gonna have things like GA or stamina actually matter outside of the spear, it makes it really hard for grapplers against really, really like keyed in opponents or even like lower level opponents that can just kind of low block and accidentally deny a takedown even though they weren't really meaning to. So that was definitely not something that I liked. And another thing I also wasn't a fan of, I was testing out the locomotion, right? After getting your opponent's leg damage to a certain point. And it was very disappointing that the locomotion was not really hindered by leg damage. A suggestion that I have in mind after like looking up some real life examples where, moments like say Cejudo versus Mighty Mouse, right? Where like his leg buckled for a bit, right? I'm thinking that once your leg health gets to a certain point, like 20 to 30%, it gets really damaged, or even to the point where it's flashing. There's going to be like instances where your character's moving laterally and then it kind of gets into the leg health event without having like the big dramatic flash that happens when you get leg rocked, but your locomotion gets affected that way. But the locomotion in general, when your leg health gets to a certain point, it needs to get affected laterally, because what ends up happening in fights, right, when the guy's leg gets damaged to a certain point and they can't continue to get on their bicycle and keep, going around the octagon, they have to start going forward. They have to start intercepting the kicks. And if you want to make kicking a much stronger play style outside of like say like certain cheesy stuff and whatnot, that's going to be a step in the right direction, especially because we don't have a separate check input. So, but overall, a couple things there too. Also, there was some issues just stamina wise. Like I think a couple stamina changes need to be made. I've said that on Twitter that because the stamina pool seems to be a little bit higher, I like to see that the punches, because if you guys have ever taken a look at my stamina management video on UFC 4, the punches take the least out of the stamina pool. It's always been that way. And I think they just need to tax it a little bit more off of whiff. I obviously don't want a game where somebody's just holding block and they're relying on your guard to gas them out. That's not proper defense. That's not awarding an actual skilled player, And there's a small 4-ounce gloves, right? They're not going to protect everything. Like you have to do other things to block. But there definitely needs to be a penalty on somebody who's being relatively inefficient with their energy in comparison to somebody else. So definitely something that they have to keep in mind in the incoming release for the next game. Now, all that being said, right? Like I'll say like again the delivery for the game, I definitely didn't like that it was a closed beta. I would have preferred it to have been an open beta. I think that would have been significantly better, because it would have allowed more people to see what other players are doing. It would have allowed somebody like myself to teach you guys certain things. I know Marshall had dropped a video on his YouTube channel explaining the submission system, which was like really, really great that they were able to allow him to do that. But that really should have been something off rip that should have been done. You feel me? But with the negative, it's more so things like that. I would have liked for them to have a better tutorial. They should have toned down the accuracy on the tracking, little things on the stamina drain, and the weight class selection. The weight class that's not the weight class you want to showcase a new grappling system in. The weight class that they had was definitely not it. If you guys already know, if you guys play the beta, they should have gone with another weight class, like say lightweight, which has more grapplers, and it would have definitely had some more fun scrambles. I can tell you that much, with more different varied matchups. The weight class they had given us definitely was not the best weight class if you want to showcase that. But if we're gonna go into the positive stuff, I did like that it was way more responsive. Right? Way more responsive on the ground and both on the feet. But on a negative end with the responsiveness, because it's so responsive now that it's on 60 FPS, they need to do something to kind of tune the denials. The denial drain on the short-term stamina in general is way too high, especially in positions like side control. The short-term stamina drain is extremely high in a position where if you strike in that position, if you guys ever seen the memes of Derek Lewis getting up, that part of that happens because his opponent has abandoned their frame that's keeping him down to throw a strike, and then he's able to get up from there. It's not like the opponent has crucifix. If the guy's in side control and he abandons his frame, you are giving your opponent space to bridge and pop out and escape. So with that, side control can't be a holding position anymore. It cannot be as strong as a position as crucifix, can't be as strong as a position as mount. There's a reason why we rarely see anybody getting held down there with a modicum of skill in side control, right? Like if somebody's trying to posture and throw strikes, they can hold somebody down if they don't throw anything, right? They can definitely do that. But if they try to posture and throw some strikes or restore a little bit of short strikes that alleviates that pressure, then they're just going to be able to hip escape. And that needs to be accurately represented into the game, especially upon launch, and they need to do some better changes with that. So I definitely would say the short-term stamina denials with regards to the drain, that needs to get adjusted for sure, especially if you want to make the system even better, because it was pretty damn good. So on a positive note, I would say this. The best thing about it, striking-wise on the feet, is it was so much more responsive. So much more responsive. Like counter-wise, it was very responsive. Slip counters are great. The animations had a lot more utility. The newer animations that they showcased in the deep dive gave those things a shot, and they worked, right? Even with the super high accuracy right now, even seeing it still work was a really, really, it was like, okay, sweet. This is going to open up so much. And because not everybody had the same animations, you saw that there was a lot more utility for certain fighters trying to enact a specific strategy versus another. Like if you want to go leg kick heavy with one fighter, you could see that it would work better with the other. If you want to go obliques with one guy, it would work better with this guy than somebody else who has it at a lower level. So I was really happy that it wasn't just a physical change of like, okay, the animation's different, but how useful is it? The animation changes made it useful. A lot of higher level players, they expressed a lot of like, oh man, this is great. Like this disguises this so much better. The kicks look better right here with this guy versus with this guy. I can disguise this combo better here. So it's really good. I also like, players try to play like UFC 4 with regards to like the clinch, and it was failing miserably for them. Like guys who were like trying to just aggressively clinch over and over again, they were getting punished left and right. Like it was just like, oh man, it was like such a relief. You could punish somebody making bad decisions and just trying to mindlessly clinch you. The guys who ended up getting a clinch and did it in a tactical way, it's fair game. They got it how they're supposed to. But unlike in UFC 4 where the guy was able to keep on just clinching, now like because the strikes intercept like the straights and the jabs and everything else of that nature, it is so much better to kind of get that stuff off of you. Another thing I like to say too is there was a penalty on like the longer range fighters that they had noted that had been removed. And dude, for y'all who didn't play the beta, if y'all know who I'm talking about, Mr. Mobolaji Temitayo Oluwafemi, that dude, the one who be doing the bending. Oh man, that dude versus UFC 3 and 4, clean. Like it is a night and day difference, and it's really cool to see because now you get to see like the longer reach on fighters actually matter to an extent, and even for like the fighters who have a shorter reach, you see where their advantages have already been like shining and whatnot. But it's really cool to see, wow, like you actually feel like, all right, you got to stay at this range ain't safe here for too long, you got to close the distance this way. So I'm interested to see how it's going to work. They definitely got to make some changes for grapplers in general to kind of change a few things for sure. But it was really cool change to see. On the ground, with regards to the responsiveness on the ground, when you went against somebody who knew how to work the TBS system, it was an absolute blast. Myself, Marshall, Goat, Swiss, Papa Doc, and Ed Parker, a couple, we all got in a party, and we were just taking turns, like, matching up against one another on the game, and we were just having crazy, like, really good fights, different types of scrambles and whatnot, and it made it, like, it was really exciting. Like, I hadn't played UFC 3 in that way for a long time. Obviously, that game's years old. UFC 4, definitely not like that. Definitely. I can't even recall the last time I was like in a party playing like games with everybody else, like the same way that we were with this beta. And I can honestly say that going back to UFC 4 is going to be horrible. Like I'm not looking forward to playing UFC 4 at all. I'll do it for y'all. Like I'll go mess around, do like blitz battles or ranked or whatever while these guys do their continued weirdness and whatnot. But it's for a beta. Like, I can honestly say for a beta, it's better. Most betas are not that much better than the finished product that they already have. I'll definitely say it's better. It's a lot better than UFC 4. Now, one of the bigger things is that some would say that they can argue that this should have been UFC 4 how it is, but that game was also a COVID game, right? Oh, that's when the whole world was shutting down and everything else like that. So there's a bit of leeway there, and there's definitely room for a lot more changes. And I want them to make more changes with some more grappling exchanges. That's where I want to see some more changes within that regard, so the game doesn't get stale too quickly. The more options they create, the better the game will be. But even right now, right, they clean up the striking a little bit more. They do this a little bit more. The more rules on realism that the game takes is going to significantly be better than all the previous iterations of all their other games, and it's stepping into the right direction. So if I had to rate the beta experience, I would say it's a solid 8 out of 10, like an 8 out of 10, just because, like, obviously I got annoyed with a couple things with, like, striking stuff that should have been stopping things. Couple little details, I kind of already reported them. Of course, there was a couple bugs there, but that's to be expected. I reported all those bugs too. But as a whole, being able to have the experience with all the other players I got to play with too, Crooks as well, dropped a nice little video on this too. It was a really good experience, and I think the more that the community tends to communicate with the developers what they want based on the resources available to the devs, I think things can trend towards the right direction. What I do not want to see with EA is, like, this is not, you need to be as transparent with your community as much as possible, right? To whatever line that it can allow y'all to be. Keep doing that. Like, that's going to help out more. Doing the little trailers, doing the little, deep dives, stuff like that. When the game drops, don't just leave people in the dark, right? We used to have patch notes. We used to have all this crazy stuff every, like, couple of weeks or so. And it would be really great if y'all continue to do that, because the community will greatly appreciate that. And as a content creator myself, as well as a competitor, I would also greatly appreciate that, because if we can keep everybody here that subscribe to me, everybody that subscribe to all the other content creators, they can stay updated and they don't have to feel lost in the dark. But that's pretty much most of my negative and my pros about the beta. Fun experience, lots of things that need work for sure, but definitely like the best beta that I've had played with regard to, in comparison to UFC 3's beta, definitely in comparison to UFC 4's beta. It's better than those two. Obviously, didn't play UFC 2, so that doesn't matter to me. But anything else, if you guys have any questions on, just let me know. Remember 17, I'm out of here.